Your teenager set their backpack down, started a sentence, clocked your face, and said, "Never mind." You thought it was nothing. To them, it was data. They've been keeping receipts since kindergarten. Tiny invisible ones you never knew you were signing. And once the evidence says coming to you costs too much emotionally, they start editing what you get to know. 6 ways emotional safety quietly becomes conditional, including the one that feels the most like love. That decide whether your kid brings you the real version of their life or the edited one. 1. They map you. They know the version of you that shows up on a Sunday morning after 2 coffees. Calm, available, practically a therapist. Licensed, apparently, by 2 coffees and a Sunday. They know the version that walks in at 6:15 on a Wednesday when something went sideways at work and you sighed at the mail before you even got through the door. The mail did nothing. You both knew that. They know the exact face you make right before you say, "We'll talk about this later," and then don't. Your teenager's been running a mood audit on you since they were about 4 years old. They've mapped your energy against the day of the week, your tone on the phone, whether you've eaten. They know your patterns better than your calendar does. Bring the wrong feeling at the wrong time and something in the room shifts. You get quieter or more tense, or you solve instead of listen. So they started routing around those moments without even knowing that's what they were doing. Survival dressed up as distance. The result looks like your teen being private. What it actually is, a teenager who learned early that your good moods have a cover charge. They sit in first class. The real stuff travels cargo, if it travels at all. But distance isn't actually the damage. What comes next is 2. They start editing themselves. So far, the problem is what they bring to you. What happens next is about what they start doing to their own feelings. Sadness that calls for a 45-second hug, approved. Nervousness before the school play, adorable. Excitement about something you find exciting, obviously. The acceptable range of emotions, apparently. But anxiety that comes out sideways is irritability. The ugly crying that doesn't have a clean source and needs a long, uncomfortable silence while they figure out what they're even trying to say. Those get a different face, and they log that too. Here's what happens when some feelings get the warm response and others get the face. Kids learn to bury the ones that didn't make the cut. Over time, those buried feelings start feeling far away, even to the kid having them. Like trying to remember something that keeps moving when you reach for it. It's not that they're hiding feelings from you anymore. They're losing access to those feelings themselves. What gets installed? Some of me is welcome here, and some of me is a problem. Their brain starts pre-editing on their behalf, scanning before they've even decided what they want to say, quietly shelving the inconvenient stuff before it reaches their mouth. They become what you seemed to need. A kid who's manageable, who doesn't add to the pile, who seems fine. Fine is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The ease of them is the product of editing you never asked them to do. 3. Willing disclosure gets killed by timing. This one's different because we're not talking about a kid who's given up on you. We're talking about a kid who wants to tell you something and still gets taught not to. Can we talk about this later? The sentence that quietly does more damage than almost anything else you could say. Every time a teenager decides to say something real, there's a window, a short stretch of time when the feeling is still alive, when they're still willing to be vulnerable. Miss the window and the feeling doesn't wait. It gets tucked into things I don't bring up anymore. Windows close quietly. No announcement. Your kid doesn't storm off. They just stop. And you don't notice until the silence has been going on long enough that asking would be awkward. The critical thing here, this isn't avoidance. This is a teenager who tried and learned what trying costs. They're not tracking whether you meant to get back to it. They're tracking whether you did. Intention is yours. Experience is theirs. That gap is where the relationship lives or dies. And the experience of asking for the window and watching it close repeatedly over years rewires something deeper than behavior. It changes the belief underneath it. The teen who stops coming to you with problems didn't stop because they started trusting you less. They stopped because the evidence they were collecting stopped supporting the case. And that's before we get to what happens when they show up and you get the reaction wrong. 4. Showing up costs them. And this is where good parents accidentally make the deepest cut. This is the one that feels most like love and still quietly teaches them to carry it alone. This one's about capacity, not availability. The first 3 are about whether you're there. This one's about whether you can hold the weight without making it about you. Your kid got into a fight with their best friend, the one since 3rd grade, the one whose mom you text at school events. They actually came to you with it. And you reacted, understandably, humanly, unhelpfully. Maybe you got too big. Maybe you called the other kid a word you'd rather not admit to. Maybe you started problem solving before they were done crying. Maybe you got so visibly upset they spent the last 10 minutes of the conversation managing you instead of getting managed themselves. That's not a conversation anymore. That's a shift swap. The lesson that wires in, bringing you the truth, means managing your reaction to it. That's extra emotional labor. Sometimes it's more labor than just not telling you at all. The kids who keep coming back usually have one thing in common. Someone can stay in the room with the hard stuff without grabbing the steering wheel. Your teenager isn't consciously deciding to protect you. They just notice over time that telling you hard things leaves them more drained than before they said anything. And a 16-year-old running on empty learns to stop adding that weight to her week. At this point, it stops being about your mood. It becomes about whether they believe you can handle them at all. 5, they start testing you. And by now, they're not just reacting to you. They're studying you. Once that belief settles in that you might not be able to hold the weight, something changes in how they operate. They stop passively absorbing the pattern. They start actively confirming it. I failed the quiz today. Waiting. My friend was kind of weird to me. Watching. I've been feeling really tired lately. Checking. These are tests dressed up as small talk, little honest moments floated out to see how safe the bigger ones would be. And they want to be wrong. They want you to come find them later and say, hey, tell me more about that thing. The tests are hope dressed up as caution, but there's no dramatic moment where they stop. Just a pattern of tests that keep coming back the same answer. At some point, they stop asking and just accept it. Every brushed off, tired lately updates the read. Don't escalate to the real thing. That answer just got stamped permanent under don't bring the big stuff. The parent who says, yeah, me too, busy week, and kept walking just answered the question. The door is closed. They'll keep walking through the house looking for someone who'll stop. Most of the time, they find their phone instead. The phone always stops. The phone never sighs at the mail. The relationship is in maintenance mode now. What comes next makes that permanent. 6, it stops being behavior and becomes identity. This next one is where patterns stop being patterns and become personality. Everything so far has been about patterns. What they bring, what they hide, whether they test. Behavioral adaptation. Still reversible. This is the one that isn't. You're so sensitive. You're always so dramatic. Here we go again. 3 words. Whole self-story rewritten. These land different than correction. Correction targets what they did. Labels target who they are. When emotions become identity, when the kid is their big feelings rather than a kid who's having big feelings, something calcifies. The feelings don't get smaller. The kid just gets quieter about having them. Same feelings, better concealment. Nobody notices until they're 24 and sitting in a therapist's office saying, "I don't know, I always seemed fine." They develop a completely functional public version of themselves. Go to school, gets good grades, seems fine, while the real one handles things privately, in notes apps and group chats, at midnight, quietly running an underground emotional startup no adult has equity in. It's not about access anymore. It's about whether they believe there's a version of themselves worth bringing to you at all. The teenager who learned early that their emotional volume was too high for the house didn't develop better regulation. They developed better concealment. Kids who get good at hiding usually don't become teenagers who call. What actually changes this? Nobody sits down and has the conversation about emotional safety. That's not how it works. What actually happens is your kid's doing homework at the kitchen table, you're cooking something that isn't going well, and they say, "Do you ever feel like nobody actually knows you?" And everything you do in the next 90 seconds either opens a door or quietly closes one. It's a Tuesday. It's always a Tuesday. Not a sit-down conversation. Not a special moment. Just Tuesday doing what a Tuesday does. What changes this doesn't look like anything you'd expect. It's the pause. The phone put face down. The "tell me more" that actually waits for an answer. It's remembering the thing they said about lunch and circling back to it at dinner. Research keeps finding the same boring truth. Kids open up where warmth shows up reliably. Here's what that looks like. A parent who spent years getting too big, too fast. The kind who'd clock out after 3 minutes and say, "Just try not to think about it." Solid advice. Never worked out once. She starts changing one thing. When her daughter starts a sentence and trails off, she stops, puts the phone down, asks again. Every time, for months. The daughter doesn't announce she noticed. 6 months later, she starts finishing the sentences. Then she starts bringing new ones. By the time she's 17, she calls from college just to talk. For no reason at all. Just because she knows the call won't cost her anything. The kid who knows you'll stop for the Tuesday conversations will eventually come to you with the stuff that actually matters. The scary stuff. The stuff sitting in drafts, waiting for a moment that feels safe. They're not deciding whether to tell you that night. They decided years ago. Every Tuesday, they decided. And if you're lucky, you still have more Tuesdays left than you think. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, watch why teens stop trusting their parents next. This is how the editing starts. That video is the 7 things that make it permanent.